President Trump is still hanging on to hope that he can somehow end the Ukraine war by tweet. Is this another case of President Trump stalling and doing nothing? Or is there a real prospect that this half-baked plan is going to somehow succeed? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So these videos are actually getting pretty tiresome for me to make because, well, you can't really rely on the president saying anything. In fact, he appears to have, as we've talked about on this channel, no discernible policy vis-a-vis Ukraine. Do we help them? Do we hurt them? Do the Europeans take it first? Do we demand their minerals before giving them aid? Right? What is the plan exactly? Well, Trump now has released what seems to be, well, it's a tweet. And I just want to take a minute and appreciate just how unbelievable this is from the President of the United States. So first off, the title in all caps is "A Letter Sent by President Donald J. Trump to All NATO Nations and, comma, the World, colon." Now, first off, this isn't a letter. A letter is not a tweet. They're different. So you might call it a message. But also, this grammatically is something that we cover in the 4th grade. So imagine if you were told, listen, you're going to have the opportunity to send a crucial message about the most pressing geopolitical issues of our time to the entire world and to every NATO country. And then you make obvious grammar mistakes. It's pretty embarrassing. So, colon and then quote. Okay. I am ready to do major sanctions, capital S, not supposed to be capitalized, on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed, comma, and started, comma, to do the same thing, comma, and when NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia. So this is probably, he's not fundamentally wrong that NATO nations do buy a lot of oil from Russia, and that's because when the sanctions regime was rolled out, NATO nations were facing a massive inflationary crisis. Now, that inflationary crisis has ebbed, and NATO nations should be much better positioned to terminate their purchase of Russian oil. This is something that's been in the works for a while. They're trying to escalate the timeline. I think they're still 2 or 3 years away from eliminating their dependence on Russian oil. But crucially, there are a few countries, particularly Robert Fico in Slovakia and Viktor Orban in Hungary, who are NATO members who have explicitly said, we're never going to do this. Turkey is another example, right? The Turkish dictator said, I'm not going to stop buying Russian oil. It's just not going to happen. And so these countries, as long as there is one holdout, and Trump knows there is at least one holdout, one pro-Russian strongman, he knows that this is never going to happen, right? So he says, as you know, NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%. And, well, yeah, true, but so has the Americas. And the purchase of Russian oil by some, Russian oil being capitalized, that's an iffy capitalization, by some has been shocking. Again, there's all these commas that don't need to be here. It greatly weakens your negotiating position and bargaining power over Russia. Anyway, I am ready to quote go unquote. By the way, we're already in a quotation, so we never closed quoted it. Go when you are. Just say when, question mark. What? That's not a question. I believe that this plus NATO as a group placing 50 and 100% tariffs on China to be fully withdrawn after the war with Russia and Ukraine is ended will also be of great help in ending this deadly but ridiculous war. China has a strong control and even grip comma, over Russia, comma, and these powerful tariffs will break that grip. This is not Trump's war, parenthesis, it would never have started if space, it would never have space started if I was president, exclamation mark, close parenthesis, comma. It is Biden and Zelensky's war. Which again, you notice who's missing in that trifecta of people who started it is Vladimir Putin. It's Vladimir Putin's war. And he goes, yeah, it's technically correct, right? Biden and Zelensky. Technically, Zelensky could end the war at any time by just surrendering. Just like America could have ended its Revolutionary War at any time by capitulating the country back to Britain. It would have saved thousands of American lives. In fact, surrendering to Germany would have saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. And of course, just letting the Confederates leave the country and persist in slavery would have saved hundreds of thousands, nearly 500,000 American lives. So, you know, it's worth noting that Trump's strategy, while true, misses the key detail of Ukraine may want to be independent from Russia. So he continues, I'm only here to help stop it and save thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives. 7,000 lives lost last week alone. Crazy. Exclamation mark. Close parenthesis. Period. If NATO does as I say, the war will end quickly and all of those lives will be saved. If not, you are just wasting my time, comma, and the time, comma, energy, comma, and money of the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter. John J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Now, you may think to yourself, that's really weird because 2 weeks ago, Trump said that if Putin didn't take concrete steps to move towards peace, then Putin was going to be facing major sanctions. But now Trump's saying, well, actually, we're not going to face major sanctions unless Europe does major sanctions as well. And you may note that if this were the goal to say, hey, let's get NATO off Russian oil, well, what would you probably need to give to NATO countries? Well, you'd have to give them access to affordable oil, to affordable petroleum products. And lo and behold, the U.S. is actually a net exporter of petroleum. In fact, we're one of the world's largest producers of petroleum. And so it seems like it would be a natural fit to say, hey, the U.S. will provide you with petroleum products, refined, because we can do the refining here in the United States. In exchange, though, you have to rapidly decrease your purchases of Russian oil. You have to speed up your timeline. Again, this is something that could be a policy, but you notice we're finding out about this now in a grammatically unhinged letter, but also it involves. But remember, 2 weeks ago, the president was issuing ultimatums saying something totally different. Just like 2 weeks before that, he had said that if Vladimir Putin doesn't sit down and have a trilateral meeting with Zelensky, remember, that was supposed to happen immediately after Trump and Putin's meeting. They actually thought they had gotten Putin to agree to it. Remember, they had thought Putin had agreed to new terms to peace. What happened to that? What happened to the progress at that peace summit, right? And there's no meeting between Zelensky and Putin scheduled. And Zelensky, by the way, has said repeatedly he'll meet with Putin on a train, on a plane, right? Anywhere he wants. And so I probably, as a policy on this channel, I'm going to stop covering the president's tweets because they don't mean anything. Literally, this was clearly not even checked by someone for correct grammar. So there's almost no way that this was checked against, run by people like the Secretary of State. There's no way it was run by Steve Witkoff. This is just Trump experiencing a feeling. And I want to point out here that I looked up Grok, and the reason I'm not like in love with Grok as an AI, but crucially, it has access to a robust amount of tweets, of data from Twitter. And I asked it, over the last 12 months, describe all the times Trump has issued deadlines and ultimatums to Vladimir Putin, either to achieve a ceasefire, peace progress, or end the war in Ukraine, right? Overall, these involve threats of economic sanctions. So as you can see, January 20th, Trump gave an initial ultimatum, which, by the way, guys, an initial ultimatum, the point of an ultimatum is it's the last one. There is no initial ultimatum. There's supposed to be an ultimatum, right? Initial ultimatum threatening tariffs and sanctions. Russia did not comply with demands and negotiate an end to the Ukraine conflict. Russia to date has participated in zero meaningful negotiated settlements with Ukraine. He framed it as, quote, the easy way or the hard way. Then, 4 months later, of course, nothing had happened. Trump gave Putin a 2-week deadline to respond to calls for a ceasefire in Ukraine amid questions about U.S. military assistance and trust in Putin. There was no action taken. In May and June, Trump continued to reference 2-week timelines in response to queries about the Ukraine war, potential shifts in U.S. policy. No new specific ultimatum was detailed, but this period reinforced the habit of deferring decisions with short deadlines that often expired with no follow-through. Early July, Trump issued a 50-day ultimatum saying that if no ceasefire agreement was reached by early September, the U.S. would impose 100% secondary sanctions on Russia and countries buying Russian oil. This was positioned as a major escalation. By, of course, late July, Putin didn't respond. Trump shortened the deadline to 10 to 12 days, i.e. August 9th to 11th. He threatened very severe consequences if unmet. Putin did nothing and no consequences followed. August 4 to 6th, Trump advanced another deadline, August 8th, threatening additional sanctions on Russia and tariffs on partners like India if the bombing of Ukrainian cities did not stop. He hiked tariffs on India as a precursor. U.S. envoy met with Putin. No ceasefire materialized. Late August, another ceasefire between Putin and Alaska. Trump issued another couple of weeks deadline expiring in early September. Putin responded before U.S. action. This came amid reports of no progress in talks. And in early September, the 50-day deadline from July expired on 2 September. No resolution. Subsequent deadlines, another 10 days and 2 weeks from August, passed without enforcement, meaning that Trump was simply backing down repeatedly. Russia has escalated its attacks, attacking Ukrainian cities and attacking Ukrainian cities and now attacking a NATO ally in Poland. To date, Trump has taken no actions. Now, Trump will say that, listen, I put out a 50% tariff on India, which you may know is not at all. Remember, India is the number 3 largest buyer of Russian oil after China, who has not been tariffed at all. And of course, India really didn't give a shit about that tariff because they said, we're happy. We know who our friends are. We're here to deal with a reliable partner. And of course, Trump has said is already back in negotiations with India to try to walk it back. So you can see that there have been a host of these kind of major policy shifts. And remember, that summary doesn't even include additional policies where the U.S. government coerced Ukraine to sign a minerals deal that they said was going to allow them to purchase U.S. weapons in the future. None of those purchases have happened. Ukraine has been prohibited from purchasing U.S. weapons, and instead Trump has forced the Europeans to make those purchases, but then has also banned the Europeans from making those purchases. So it continues to be that there is no policy to be made. There is no reason to conduct diplomacy with him because there will never be a consistent policy. There'll never be a consistent trade policy, right? You may know, as we just talked about, that the Europeans could buy U.S. oil, but the problem is, remember, Trump just imposed tariffs on them. So if they want to have an alternative, a place that they can go to buy oil from the Russians, they can do so. They have to pay American tariffs too. So do you want them to back away from Russian oil? Then you should probably try to sell them American oil. And I'm sure the American economy would love to be able to sell its oil to the Europeans. So you see how this whole thing is just very poorly thought out. There isn't a policy, right? This isn't part of a policy. This isn't part of a framework. These things aren't negotiated. These are just feelings. These are just ideas, right? This is something that would normally be something thought up by a low-level staffer who's a couple of drinks in on a Friday afternoon. And he goes in on Monday and he kind of would draft it up as a policy paper and he'd send it to his boss, and his boss would say all the things that I just said. And then that staffer would probably go back to his undergrad because this is like an intern level thought, right? Just a really, really, really thin understanding of why people do the things they do. Again, he doesn't even understand the causes. He doesn't seem to understand what Russia's doing. He doesn't seem to understand the NATO position or how NATO decisions are made. There's almost nothing that reflects any kind of policy understanding here. And yet we continue to treat, and I'm guilty of it too, treat the president as though these kind of statements are real U.S. diplomacy. They're not. They're just like text messages from, honestly, an 80-year-old man who appears to be experiencing a level of cognitive decline, right? I don't know what else to tell you. There's not really any other explanation. Either he is a dramatic, systematic liar and never has held anyone to a deadline in his life, or he literally forgets that he's made policy in the past and doesn't listen to the people who say, you already came up with a policy. Anyway, we will keep you informed of actual policy changes, actual actions that the U.S. takes. Otherwise, I'm going to start simply dismissing these kind of things out of hand. Now, if you want to make sure that I can continue to speak truth to power, you may note that I have basically no friends left, right? Sponsors drying up, been critical of, critical of just about everybody. The Biden administration, the Trump administration, Israel, Qatar, Hamas, Russia, Ukraine. So I depend on you guys, though, because I try to be honest. The reason I can do this is because you guys have my back over at combatvetnews.com. You guys support me as members there. You get access to the uncensored combat footage analysis, and you continue to get to hear true, honest opinions, not some BS advertiser-friendly lies. So thanks to you guys at the Colonel tier who support me, guys like Paul Wheeler, Michael Colleen, Jeff Davies, Francis Carius, Thomas Anderson, Eugenia Cuesta, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. You guys make this possible. I appreciate you so much. I'll see you. Cheers.